Hello everyone, welcome to the European Integration course. Today we will continue with Chapter 2, Integration Theories in the European Union Politics. In this chapter, we will firstly talk about conceptualizing European political integration and then institutional change in the European Union, post-Maastricht European integration, the new intergovernmentalism, and lastly, the European Union as a polity. We will start with conceptualizing European political integration. The understanding of what political integration is has changed over time in accordance with the actual development of the EU, and up until now, political integration does not have a single authoritative definition. Political integration can be subdivided into level, scope, and territorial dimensions. In this chapter, we take a broader view of the concept by underlining its three basic features: multidimensional, multi-method, and multi-level. Taken together, these features give rise to the conceptualization of EU as a compound union where governing activity is dispersed across multiple authorities. Political integration is usually identified with the emergence of a political community based on trust, loyalty, and shared values. It is both useful and necessary to differentiate between the subdimensions of political integration. These are policy integration, institutional integration, civilizing security dimensions, and attitudinal dimension. In recent decades, studies have predominantly focused on the analysis of political integration and its dynamics of widening, deepening, and completion or consolidation. In contrast, the underlying societal dimension of the European integration has somehow been ignored by scholars of comparative politics. The relatively weaker European social integration and the underdeveloped European identity might lead to disintegrative consequences in times of severe crisis. They are supposed to lead to a downward pressure on the level and scope of integration at a time when there emerged an increased need for redistributive policies on the European level. Now let's move on to the institutional change in the European Union. The EU is neither a state nor a traditional international organization, but rather a unique experiment embedding the national in the European and the European in the national. The EU is a non-state actor, but it performs a wide variety of state functions, both internally and externally. What distinguishes the EU above all is its institutions. Institutions are arenas where power and influence are exercised and bargains take place within a framework of norms, rules, ideas, and practices, formal and informal. Policy debates are mostly debates between national actors pursuing national interests. EU institutions do not always act as agents of member governments. They also enjoy substantial autonomy against them. They provide political direction, manage the union, and integrate interests. Studying them as autonomous entities should not downplay institutional interdependence and balance essential for the proper functioning of the EU. Now, let's have a look at post-Maastricht European integration. Post-Maastricht European integration, which is mostly regarded as the new intergovernmentalism, is a contentious issue. An underlying feature of the new intergovernmentalism is the paradoxical attitudes of member state governments towards integration. Another feature of the new intergovernmentalism is the search through deliberation for consensus in EU decision-making. Policymaking has developed informally, escaping many of the legislative frameworks that characterized supranational lawmaking beyond nation-state. The new intergovernmentalism is also characterized by member states' preference to delegate authority to de novo bodies, which are located at the interface of supranational and intergovernmental governance mechanisms and numerous regulatory and executive agencies. These bodies often enjoy considerable autonomy by way of executive or legislative power and have a degree of control over their own resources. More importantly, the new intergovernmentalism can be understood not as a temporary deviation from a more long-standing supranational trend. Rather, it is a novel phase in the European integration with particular features which are detectable in all institutional domains and with regard to all aspects of EU politics. While the new intergovernmentalism begins with integration paradox, it ends up with a state of instability of the EU. Our last topic for today is the European Union as a polity. Institutional debates had been an integral part of the deeper discussions about competing visions of Europe's future, which each reflected a particular and ideal institutional model and a particular ultimate end goal, broadly divided into federal approaches aiming at transcending the national state system and functionalist approaches aiming at rebuilding or rescuing the nation-state in post-war Western Europe. The EU is the site of an open-ended struggle between the supporters of these two approaches. From a functionalist perspective, there would be no need for a far-reaching institutional change to the community model as a result of national governments' delegation more powers to supranational institutions as long as the community limits itself basically to regulatory functions. Instead, the Council should be made even more explicitly dominant as the core executive power within the community. While the advocates of functionalism defend the institutional status quo of the EC or EU, their blueprint does not go beyond an intergovernmental union of states to embrace a federal union of peoples. For the advocates of the federal approach, the process of parliamentarization would improve the democratic legitimacy of the EU governance and policy process by ensuring that it has the support of European citizens and not only their governments. Furthermore, all of these changes took place against the background of reinforced intergovernmentalization of EU decision-making. So, this is the end of our program for Chapter 2 of the European Integration course. Goodbye and see you in our next program, Chapter 3.